You know how every home has that one spot, the place you think about all day where you're finally able to exhale the second you walk through the door? For me, that spot is 100% my bed. I have completely become a bed monger, as I like to call them. My husband is all about just like being in bed all the time. I used to just be like a couch sitter, but now it's like I dream about my bed. And listen, let's be honest, who in your house tries to sneak into your bed the most? At my house, it is completely a competition. My kids love to go into my bed. Obviously, as I mentioned, my husband loves our bed so much. And it's like everyone knows that cozy earth sheets are where the comfort lives and where, you're going to find the most comfort in the entire house. And Cozy Earth has this amazing bamboo viscose bedding, and it is truly next level. It naturally wicks away heat and moisture, which means that you sleep several degrees cooler. And when I say it's hard to get out of the bed in the morning, I mean it. These sheets, plus the bubble cuddle blanket, which, by the way, my friend has. And so this is on my next, wish list, the next order that I placed from Cozy Earth. I'm getting the bubble cuddle blanket. It is mid-weight, ultra soft faux fur blanket with the dreamiest bubble texture. And my friends have very cozy homes also. And when I go to my friend's house and use her bubble cuddle blanket, I'm like, yeah, I don't plan to leave. And so it's not just bedding, it's a full on sensory retreat. On those days where you're feeling a little burnt out and when life feels a little too much, my cozy earth bed is the first place I want to be. It's calm, cool, quiet, and wrapped in the softest layers imaginable. I personally never knew bedding could actually feel this different, but once you try it, you'll get it and you will never go back. And here's the best part, it is a risk-free purchase. You get a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty because Cozy Earth knows once you feel discomfort, you are not letting go. So head to cozyearth.com and use my code HUMANHR for 40% off. And hey, if you get a post-purchase survey, don't forget, be sure to let them know you heard about Cozy Earth right here, because your bed should be more than just a place to sleep. It should be your happy place. Cozy Earth makes that possible. Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Tracy Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. You know what to do. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And this week, we're talking a lot about well-being in the workplace, but from an angle that we have not talked about yet. And as an avid remote person, meaning like I'm pretty big on being remote, at least having the flexibility to do so, I think this is a very interesting conversation that we're going to have today and this week, because we're going to talk about like returning to the office and how we can make that experience one that's a good experience and one that hopefully is as engaging as possible. So it'll be interesting for us all to flex this muscle, especially for me, because I have sworn up and down on my podcast that I would never go back to the office. However, I think if Sarah Davis, who is my guest this week, were in charge of what that return to office looked like, I'd probably be less resistant. So with that, let me introduce you to Sarah. She is the workplace strategy lead of HED, one of the largest integrated architecture and engineering firms in the US, serving clients nationally in a broad range of market sectors, including healthcare, higher ed, mission-critical housing, and mixed-use pre-K-12 science, manufacturing, and product development, workplace, community, and government. Her sector specializes in designing workplaces that foster creativity, collaboration, and a supportive team environment that promotes the brand, products and services, and culture of the client. Sarah is an analytical strategist with 20 plus years of experience working in business intelligence and data-driven design. She has been part of several high-profile, award-winning projects, including the design of Rock Venture's Detroit headquarters, which was featured in Interior Design Magazine as the 2022 Best of Year winner for Medium Corporate Office. Sarah has a depth of insight into design strategies and styles that can impact company culture, productivity, and the recruiting and retention of talent. Sarah, thank you so much for joining the podcast and for being here this week.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. What a nice introduction.
Oh, yes. Well, I always say it to every guest that like when someone reads your bio, like it's really a nice reminder of every single thing that you've accomplished. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
And as your bio set on to introduce,
we'll be effectively talking a lot about well-being in the workplace and literally speaking, like how well-being can be designed. So maybe we start off by talking about human-centered design and
Sure.
what that looks like both in office and with a virtual office, and where your maybe even where your expertise comes from in this regard.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I'm having had a really interesting kind of career up to the point that I'm at right now. And it's always funny when hindsight's 2020. When you look back on it and you see kind of the path that you've charted, you're like, okay, this all makes a lot of sense. I came from a very analytical background right from the get-go. So I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And my background is actually my degree is in political science, which some people say I don't quite understand the bridge here, but I really see a lot of synergy between the work that I was doing, really understanding kind of complex and really elevated research studies, and really kind of getting into the nitty gritty and really elevating that into something that is a summation of that. What are the signals telling us? What is this data and information really pointing us to? And so that led me to a career in business intelligence where I spent 13 years helping to really start to read those tea leaves and those signals and information and data, and becoming an extension of different teams within an organization to understand the context they needed to see information in. What is their perspective? Where are they trying to drive to? What is their vision and their objectives? And then how can we use this information to bolster and help them along that journey to get them there? So the last couple of years, since 2018, I've been focused on workplace design and specifically, and really the strategy behind it. And I think to some it may seem like it's kind of over the top, or we have to do this really big investment or renovation, but there's so many cues within the workplace and so many opportunities that we have that we can really better our environments in ways that are really, really effective and functional for people to, as you were just mentioning, feel their best. When people feel their best, they're going to perform their best, right? They're going to
Hmm.
be kind of in an optimal state to be able to do the things that we want to do, which is really be innovative for their company, right? So there's so many times where we kind of just sit back and we're kind of going through the motions. But what's that next level of really being able to be creative, to be inspired, and then take that and be able to recognize that for the organization to do better?
Yeah, it's first of all, thank you for sharing more about your background and how you've kind of taken a more analytical approach to something that could kind of just be crossing things off of a list,
Sure.
and taking again that approach and applying a human-centered focus to it. I think even all of the times that I spent in office or on site, however we want to phrase it, I've thought about, as since we first spoke, I've thought about, well, was it abundantly clear to me that someone came in and really thought about the experience that someone had or would have in this environment?
Right.
And there was only one instance where I could think of, oh, well, I know for a fact that there was a real intentionality behind designing and creating the office space. And that was at one of the retailers that I used to work for, and I was there for like 5 years. And I remember distinctly that a couple of my colleagues had kind of been tasked with really creating a space that was inviting and welcoming and comfortable.
Mhm.
And with that, they worked with someone who like helped pick out the right chairs and designed like where the cubicles were or where the offices were and what they looked like. And it didn't really have so much of an effect in my mind at the time. I wasn't like, oh, that's really nice. They're thinking through all of these things. But now, since reflecting on what you do, I'm like, oh, actually, there's a whole strategy behind this.
Right.
So I'm curious from your perspective, when we think about this human centered approach to design, what are some of the things that are really important to you that you really think about when it comes to this return, especially thinking through the return to office transition, where you have potentially a cohort that is fairly resistant and has maybe even a negative perspective on being in an office compared to what they've been doing the last number of years?
Yes, could not have framed that up better than what you just said. I think before the pandemic, we were all just, it was just the expectation, right? We were all on site, we were there full time. And so there wasn't as much thought given to the workplace. And there wasn't, I think, a lot of opinion about it as much
Hmm.
either, right? Because it was just what you did. And now, as we've been exposed to these different environments over the last couple of years, and the way that we're working has shifted coming back into the environments that may not have been even that great before is that much more glaringly obvious in terms of it having an impact, possibly a negative impact on our work. So that's why I really like when you're talking about human-centered design. HR is one of my favorite audiences to speak to. And I don't just say that because I'm on this podcast. I think that the reason is that people are really at the heart of work. And the perspective that HR professionals have in that conversation of thinking about attracting and retaining talent and thinking about that on-site experience that you mentioned. And something really important is, we have a culture. We talk about that a lot. We talk about what it means. We have our values and our mission, our philosophies, whatever we call them internally. But this opportunity to then say, well, what does that culture look like in our office, right? What does that manifest in space? And how do we make sure that there's not misalignment between the two of those things? So if we say that people are at the center of our organization, that they're our most important asset, but then we're walking into space that is clearly not something that's very inspiring or thoughtful, or, it's kind of your beige cubicles and, no natural light and fluorescent light and things like that. People may say, well, maybe people aren't necessarily at the, center of your business. So we really want to make sure that these things have alignment, and what you're talking about with your culture for especially candidates, right? Candidates are coming in, they're seeing on site, on your website, things that you're talking about, and they're thinking, this is a great organization. They have resource groups. They have all of these celebrations and acknowledgments. And then they come into your office, and does the office really reflect and provide an experience for your brand and your culture in space for that candidate who's walking through the door, or guest or visitor?
That's really helpful. It does make me think about how you get that information. Like, how do you, I mean, of course, I'm sure that working with the client, you're connecting on what the client's needs are and what they're looking for, how many people they expect to have in the office at one time, what their growth plan is, and things like that. I'm sure that that's all part of it. But how do you gather the sentiment from the like typical employee, let's say? Is it what's reported on by the client, or is it more than that?
That's part of it. Excuse me. There's an opportunity, I think, for decision makers and HR in particular to really think deeply about who they're gathering information about the office from. So as you just mentioned, surveys, getting some sentiment from people who are actually in these spaces is really critical, and involving them in that part, that process is a really great and critical element, because they're the people who are working and functioning in all these different niches of your office space. They're the people that you may be saying, we want you to come back on site at, 3 days a week, 4 days full time. So it's really important, I think, to have diversity in terms of who you're speaking with, because as decision makers, if you're saying we want everyone to come back in, and you're only relying upon the insights and the feedback of people who have private offices, for example, the experience of someone who's in a workstation is going to be a lot different. And it's really important to make sure that you're gathering information, again, from diverse perspectives. And there's different ways to do that. You can do surveys, you can do focus groups where you're starting to bring in people that are representatives of different voices from different groups. If you have a really big organization, that can be also really powerful and effective. So there's ways to be able to gather that information and start to understand, what are some of the challenges? What are people saying about our environments? And what are those sticking points that maybe non-negotiables for people in terms of their expectations, whether it's around, wellness and some of the well-being elements of the office, or if it's about just the fact that they can't get work done because the office is too distracting or noisy and they don't have that ability to focus, because then they're going to want to default back to being in their home environment, for instance, or being remote.
That's really interesting. I guess it does make me think. I mean, I led off the introduction with how much of an avid remote worker I am, and that, my listeners have heard me say probably over 5 times at this point in the last, I don't know, few years, that it would be very hard for me to go back to an office, and that being remote is just something that I really highly value above a lot. Um, and I know I'm not the only person that feels that way. And I also know that realistically, there might be a time where I am back in the office, but I might be back begrudgingly. And I'm certainly not the only person in that with that headspace either. And I'm a pretty optimistic person, and there are people who are not optimistic who are begrudging about these changes, right? So I share that because I'm curious how there is like an approach to saying, hey, for clients of yours who say, like, we're going back to the office,
Mhm.
if there is a part of the strategy that you influence that relates to a flexible approach, and if that's something that you work with your clients on, or if that's kind of just like a business decision that they decide on, and you effectively build, like, kind of help to design the environments around that decision. Like, where, I guess the question is, where do some of those strategies sit? Is it predetermined by the business, or is it, or by the client, or is it also influenced by the data that you get as you are collecting all of those insights?
Yeah, great question. So I think it's a little bit of both. And the reason is that the clients that we're servicing are coming from a myriad of different industries. So they're serving different functions. And I think depending on the type of function that you're serving, it may make more sense for you to be in the office more full time versus another role that can be facilitated a little bit more easily remote. But I also think our clients are looking to us for that guidance and understanding because it's their portal of information to say, well, what are
Mm.
you seeing? What are your recommendations about our space? And that's where really having this opportunity to go deep and having that human centered lens of coming in and saying, here's some discovery that we're doing about your particular workplace, your culture. This is how we're seeing it from the inside out. This is what we're seeing when we come into your offices. Because sometimes when you're in your office day in and day out, you kind of look past it, right? You don't see some of the things that may be obvious to someone else who's coming through the door. We're saying and we're talking about our culture this way. And here's ways that we see your physical environment lining up with that. And here's some ways that we may not see it as much lining up with that. So sometimes that outside perspective is really important. But I think at the end of the day, it's really important for organizations to understand the power of social connection that we've started to lose, I think, throughout the pandemic in the last couple of years.
Mhm.
And this opportunity that the workplace really affords to bring people together. And so I, do workplace strategy, obviously for, my living, but I also see value and I work from home sometimes as well. So I think that there's an opportunity to think about what is the purpose of the office, which is going to be a little bit of a different answer for every organization. What do you need the office to do here? What do we want people doing when they're on site? And how can we really use this as a tool to optimize our business, right, in a really effective way? And so the opportunity to bring people together socially, to connect them, helps them to be even stronger when they are then working remotely because we've created rapport. We've created a sense of belonging. I mean, especially for people who are new to an organization or younger, just starting out, that ability to connect with people, have a bit of that mentorship, can be really effective in person, right? And can bring them into the organization, create that sense of identity and that sense that, I'm valued here as opposed to being remote all the time and maybe not having that personal touch that you have with your team otherwise. So I think that there can be a lot of power in being on site, especially if it's done effectively.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense to me. I appreciate what you've shared, and one of the things I was thinking about as you were speaking is that there is a generational element to this too. Like, I just can imagine that if someone's just graduated college and they're really looking to make friends and meet people, that working remotely is undesirable, even if it provides them flexibility to do things. And then on the other side of things, like, there might be people in the same generation who really prioritize travel over everything, and they're like, actually, all I want is remote work. And so you can certainly get both from probably every generation, or a mix of those things from every generation. But I could definitely see and at least reflect on my own career, where if I like wasn't married with kids today, like, would I want to be in an office?
Right.
Maybe. If I really was looking for that social aspect to things, because something that I have really learned since being fully remote is that it is, and predictably, it is very difficult to build culture remotely.
Mhm.
Like, you can do it, it just
Right.
takes a lot longer.
Right.
Whereas when you're in person, having a great culture is one of those things that hopefully is inevitable for companies that prioritize having a good culture.
Right.
And so I think, for our purposes, or for the purposes of someone in my type of role in HR, or really any other leader who wants to create something special for someone, a great experience for someone, it's one of those things where, going back to your point, what is the office for?
Hmm.
And there are companies out there who have gone back to being in person very recently, who, to me, it seems that for them, when they answer that question, it's about productivity. That
Hmm.
there's a sense that their team is not as productive as they once were, and being in office is basically an effort to drive better productivity. If you ask me, I think productivity comes when you focus on experience,
Hmm.
because the better someone's experience is, the happier they are at work. The happier they are at work, the more willing they are to do a great job, even though, of course, people can be in bad environments and still have a deep responsibility to their work. Not everything is mutually exclusive, but I think this is probably, to me, also a call to action for companies who want to go back to the office, or eventually bring people back to the office, that they really need to think about what the right purpose is. That, sure, productivity might be your end goal, but it doesn't have to be the why.
Agreed.
You know,
Yeah.
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 Go
I
ahead.
mean, I feel like what you just touched on is so true. I mean, people can be productive in a multitude of different environments, and the pandemic showed us that. I think what you touched on with culture, and really the opportunity to spread culture, is important. I would also say that the importance of people being creative together and innovating together and kind of taking work to that next level, seeing bigger
Mm.
pictures. There's a fascinating study that was talking about people collaborating now that we've had the last couple of years more remote, people collaborating together virtually versus people collaborating together in person, and how many more ideas are generated when people are actually in person.
Mm.
And it had to do with their very cognitive focus on little boxes on a screen. It narrows your focus, and it's not
Oh,
kind of
interesting.
encouraging your brain to think big picture, right? So that may be another element or routine or ritual that we're going through, where we say, if we're really trying to do this offsite where we're generating ideas, right? We've got to think big. We're going to take the company, over the next year. Where are we going? That might be better facilitated in person, right? And that might be
Mm.
something that we bring people together in person to do, versus something that is more mundane, kind of day to day, and we can do that virtually.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I still do think that, again, everything can happen or can be built remotely, but there are definitely things that are done better when in person.
Right.
I think, for me, I wish that companies were even a little bit more innovative with their approach to being in office. I'm curious if you even have any anecdotes on this, but when I think about where companies spend their money, of course, there are some tax advantages to having offices and things like that. So I get it. But I, I, I guess I could imagine like a better experience for people if there were, smaller offices in various places where there is maybe a critical mass, or a larger group of people or employees around the world. Even, we don't even have to think about just in the United States, but obviously we know that companies have kind of expanded their reach
Mhm.
since going remote. It allowed them to hire more globally. It allowed them to hire in places around the world that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to. So I guess my thought is like, well, rather than having these gigantic HQs in different cities, of course, depending on the size of the company, or in your case, the client, if they had almost like these flexible format type of offices, not to say that it's like a WeWork or something like that, because of course, for your purposes, you don't really have a lot of ability to create what the culture or the experience is like in those types of offices. But for all intents and purposes, like if there's smaller offices that allow people in those areas to come and go,
Mhm.
and to use the office when they really feel they need it, while really keeping the priority and the focus on flexibility. To me, it's kind of like getting the best of both worlds, because then teams that work in those places could come together and be in person and have all of those wonderful things that you've talked about, without a company saying, oh, you have to be in on this day or 5 days a week and from 9
Right.
to 5. So I'm curious if you have clients that you've worked with who have taken a bit of like a hyper flexible approach in that way with their office spaces.
Yeah, it's interesting. HED is actually the first company I've worked for that has a distributed model. So I'm kind of part in living it right now.
Hmm.
So this has been the first time in my career where we don't just have a central HQ in some city that we're all working out of that same location. HED actually has over 9 offices across the United States. So we're from
Wow.
coast to coast, right? So Boston all the way to California and everything in between. I'm actually in the Detroit office, as you can see behind me here. Um, so I'm in Detroit, and we have a large office here as well. So this opportunity to, like you said, be a little bit more regional. So you're pulling really great talent from these different markets instead of just being in one particular city or location. And so it is really interesting. My leader is actually in Chicago. I'm working with people all across the United States. So it's fun. And I think there's a flexibility just in that, in the sense that people are in different time zones and you're negotiating that right away from the get go, right? It's like, some people aren't coming online until later or getting off earlier.
Hmm.
So I think that there is an opportunity to do that, and you can do that successfully. I think, again, it just comes back down to your culture and your organization. And if that model works for you, then I think that that can definitely be an opportunity to explore something like that if that's in the cards. It may not work for every organization, but I think it's
Mm-hmm.
something that can work really successfully if deployed correctly. But I think it's really important that, again, that connection and that ability to spread that culture and have those meaningful interactions. I know our leadership, is frequently kind of coming around and traveling to the different offices. So you're having that FaceTime, which is really important as well. So our offices, and we're going through, and we've been renovating our offices, are really great places to work. They're very low on the private offices, higher on kind of a free address hoteling kind of situation. People are kind of coming in and going at different points of time. In our office, we tend to encourage everyone to be on site on a particular day. This office is Wednesdays. Every other week, we have lunch that's brought in. So, team members come together and have an opportunity to meet and talk and collaborate and catch up with life and everything. So I think that's really important to still have that anchor right into a
Yeah,
particular
definitely.
physical space.
Definitely. I like the term anchor. That's a great analogy, actually, or a way to describe it. Um, I know, first of all, you've spoken a lot about kind of the sentiment and the feeling. And I know one of the things that we had talked about originally before we started recording was this concept of how decisions can be really easily made on paper. Like
Yeah.
leaders can say, "Oh, yeah, 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 like our teams need this and like they're going to want like a bevy machine and like all of this and like maybe a couch and like it'll be fine." And then sometimes there's a difference between like those decisions that are made and the feeling or the sentiment
Yeah.
that is, present or prevalent after the fact. So, can you walk us through a little bit of how you reconcile those two things and make sure there's alignment?
Yeah, I love this. I love the conversation that we had around this. And it was actually inspired by one of your earlier podcasts, and it was talking about the power of words. And, earlier in this conversation today, you mentioned this idea of, headcount and growth projections and some of these
Hmm.
elements that all of us, it's a necessary part of our conversations, right? We need to talk about how many people our offices need to accommodate and things like that. But sometimes, and what your podcast was getting at, is that sometimes these words can kind of take us into the paper and remove us from the fact that these are people and
Hmm.
they have different needs, and the decisions that we're making are really impactful to that individual and their overall experience with our company and this particular job. And we always want to make sure that people have a great experience because they're going to be the ambassadors for your company, right? And
Yeah.
continuing to encourage and go out and speak positively about that. So I think that it's really important for us to think about going off of the paper where, I think we were talking as an example, you put somebody down on a workstation that's on a main corridor with a high circulation path, and there's people walking by them all day long. And then you say, okay, let's have you sit in this particular chair and, be innovative and focus on your work and get things done and be productive. And, it's fine on paper when you're looking at this 2D floor plan to assign people to a particular area, but in reality, can that person really function well in their job? Are they able, they say that once you lose your flow state, it takes 23 minutes to get back into a state of focus, right? So
Oh, wow.
if this person is constantly being interrupted, or there's constant visual and acoustic distractions in their environment, and they have to do a really detailed type job, are they really being set up for success in that particular environment? So I think that's really what we're talking about, is taking a step back from there, looking at the space really thoughtfully and saying, are there zones that we want to set up where people can do different types of behaviors, right? There's more of a quiet zone for focus or productivity, right? There's more of that collaborative area where people are getting up and ideating, moving around, because as we move around, we're kind of more in that, state of idea generation as well. And this opportunity to really connect well on the work. And so are we thinking about, like you mentioned at the top of this call, this opportunity to think intentionally about the spaces, right? And we're thinking not just on paper, not just kind of a saying, okay, yep, we're able to assign 100 people to a desk on this floor plate, but what is that experience of the people within those spaces, and are they really set up to be effective spaces for people to do the roles that they need to do?
Yeah, oh man. That's that I feel like that's the winner. That's the gold, because everything comes down to how people feel. And I mean, again, this is all about the human-centered design approach that you and HED take. And I just think about all of the opportunities that companies have. Like, fine, people are making a decision to bring people back to the office, or maybe they never left the office, and that's great. If it works for them and that's the company direction, totally fine. There are plenty of people who really, really are looking for those in-office experiences, hybrid or full-time. And I just think about how there are certain things, like anything that we do, that are kind of attributed to low-hanging fruit. And to me, like creating or expecting people to be in an office and then creating a space that's really inspiring, encouraging, inviting, collaborative, that makes sense in terms of the flow and the floor plan. It's one of those things that, again, is low hanging fruit. Like once you win that, and there's a positive sentiment and there's a feeling that generally people want to be there, then everything else kind of just resolves itself. So I think that is kind of, again, that's the winner, that's the gold, that's what everyone should be going for.
Right. And I think it goes beyond the aesthetic, right?
Hmm.
It's something where you're really kind of putting pen to paper, and you're using a lot of this. There's a ton of academic research out on the built environment and how it impacts us, which I find incredibly fascinating. But the environments that we're in right now, they're impacting how we feel, how we think. And you had mentioned at the beginning, talking about this idea that you don't really think about design very much. And I think when you have good design, you don't think about it very much, because you're just in an
Hmm.
environment, in the space where you're like, I just feel good being here. And there are people that we interview during our discovery sessions in the work that we're doing with clients, and they'll be talking about different offices they've been in, and they're like, I just love being there. Like, I just walk in and I feel good, right? And so
Oh, that's
what is
nice.
that element? What are those conditions that are going in that make that person feel that way, right? Versus someone else who says, I don't want to be there. I don't feel at my best. I get a migraine working at the lights are all
Oh,
off.
the lights. Yeah.
Yes, the lights. It's loud. It's crazy. The desk isn't, set up for me. All these things that are now the things that they're thinking about in their day. And when they're thinking about those things, they're not thinking about their work that's at hand, right? And being at their best and
True.
being able to, pour into their teams and pour into their ideas because they're fiddling with their chair, right? So how can we think about elevating the environment to a point where it's really supportive and it's facilitating, it's not hindering, but it's really facilitating and enhancing collaboration in some ways, right? Like I was just touching on, spaces where we're trying to think big, these ideation rooms, like huddle spaces, the opportunity to have a variety of different seats choices, high tops and low seats. The ability to get up and be tactile and draw on a board versus doing things digitally, both are very important. But this opportunity of autonomy and choice, right, in a space allows us to just move freely around this environment, and we're at our best. We actually start to get into a rhythm with people, right? We're starting to find synergy and start to riff off one another and really start to build something great with that momentum. So, how can that environment again be able to really help an organization to achieve what they're trying to achieve and to kind of take them to that next level?
That's so awesome. I mean, I think that anyone that's worked with you then has hopefully had an amazing, improvement on their culture too. I mean, it's just a great example of how every single thing that affects a person at work affects the culture
Mhm.
of a company. And it's almost like you throw everything and the kitchen sink at culture. You want to do everything possible to not only improve the culture but sustain a positive culture. So this has been a really interesting conversation for me, and I'm sure for the listeners also, because it's just again another lens, another perspective, another place to think about the impact of culture, the influence of someone's work environment on their experience at work. So Sarah, thank you so much for taking us through this and what you do and how you impact cultures every day with all of your clients. So thank you again, and I'd love to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners where they can find you and connect and learn more about HED. And by the way, everything will be linked in the show notes, but sometimes it's helpful to hear it too.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find us at hed.co, our website. We have a lot of different thought leadership pieces on the website. You can learn about different sectors of work that we're doing and some of the project work that we've already completed, which is a really great place. We also put a lot of our content out on LinkedIn. So you can find myself or HED on LinkedIn and follow us there, which would be really great because we typically are putting out different thought leadership pieces as well to really kind of contribute to the conversation across workplace.
Amazing. Sarah, thank you so much again for your time and your insights. And if anything comes up where, I don't know, the landscape of return to office or human-centered design changes, let me know and we'll bring you back
Absolutely.
on. We'd love to talk further, but thank you so much again.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.